I never thought a simple text message could make my hands tremble like that. The message glowed on my phone screen, burning itself into my mind. You won't be joining us on the family cruise. My wife would prefer to keep it just family. The words came from my son, my only child, the same son I had gifted a fully paid house to just months ago. The house I spent sleepless nights securing for him. The house I poured my savings into, telling myself it was a gift of love, a foundation for his growing family. And now, I wasn't family enough for their vacation. I stared at those cold words as my chest tightened. The blood roared in my ears, my hands stiff and ice cold. Slowly, I typed my response. Okay. That was all I said. That one word contained everything: the hurt, the betrayal, the realization. But even as I pressed send, my mind was screaming, so I'm good enough to buy your house, but not good enough to sit at your dinner table? Not good enough to ride your damn cruise ship? My heart pounded like war drums. My breathing grew shallow. But my face? My face stayed still, calm, almost detached. That part of me, the part that had always swallowed my pride, always excused their little cruelties, died in that moment. The phone buzzed again, a follow-up message from Tessa, my daughter-in-law, polite but cold. I hope you understand it's just simpler for everyone this way. Simpler. Of course it's simpler, Tessa. It's simpler now that you have the house, simpler now that you think you've secured your future. I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. But I wasn't crying. Not anymore. Because at that very moment, a new part of me woke up. The part that had been too soft for too long, the part that would no longer be humiliated. They thought I was going to accept this. They thought wrong. The silence in my house grew louder after that message. I sat in the same kitchen, but it didn't feel like my kitchen anymore. The morning sun crept across the tiled floor, touching the old wooden chairs, the polished countertops I had chosen, the curtains I'd sewn by hand, all for them, for Daniel and Tessa, for the family I thought I was building. Now the house felt like a museum of bad choices. On the walls hung smiling photographs of vacations I'd funded. Disney when Daniel was little, Cancun when Tessa first joined the family, the Christmas cabin trip I paid for entirely, telling myself it's my gift to them. Always giving, always making excuses for their silences. I thought back to the housewarming last spring. The house I bought for them, fully paid, no mortgage, no debt, a fresh start for their marriage. The biggest gift I had ever given anyone. Tessa had clasped my hands back then, tears glistening in her eyes. Oh, Helen, you didn't have to do this. We're so grateful. You'll always have a room here. You know that. And I believed her. Of course I did, because mothers believe. I remembered the nights I spent repainting their master bedroom myself when they were busy at work, choosing soft lavender walls because Tessa said it was soothing. I ordered the furniture online, assembled it alone in my garage, every curtain rod, every floor lamp, every cozy throw blanket, all chosen carefully, lovingly. It was easier at the time to stay busy, to pretend their growing distance was just stress, just work, just young people figuring things out. But it wasn't. The truth sat heavy on my chest now. I had made myself useful to them for so long, as the fixer, the financier, the quiet helper, that they stopped seeing me as a person. I was a resource, a purse, and once the purse was emptied, they no longer needed the woman attached to it. The next morning, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I called Irene. She arrived within the hour, like she always did. No questions, no hesitation. That's the thing about old friends. They know when words aren't needed right away. She walked through my front door, her eyes immediately scanning my face. She saw it before I could even open my mouth. "Tell me," she said softly, setting her purse down on the kitchen table. I slid my phone across the table so she could read the message herself. Her jaw clenched as she read it, but she said nothing at first. She just shook her head slowly, almost like she'd been expecting something like this. Finally, she spoke. "They've been planning this, Helen." Her words landed like a stone in my gut. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. I thought maybe it was just Tessa that she got into his head, but Daniel, he's not like this. Irene's lips pressed into a thin line. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, steady and firm. Helen, you raised a good boy, but you also raised a boy who never had to struggle, who always had you picking up the pieces. And Tessa? She saw that. She saw what she could mold him into. You made yourself small for them, and now they're acting like that's where you belong. Her words stung because they were true. I had spent years smoothing every rough patch for Daniel, canceling my own vacations to babysit their dog, draining my savings to pay off the last of their student loans, showing up to their house whenever Tessa claimed she needed help organizing, always making myself useful, always available. You need to protect yourself now, Irene said, her voice low, serious, before they try to take more. I looked at her confused. Take more? They've already got everything. Irene's eyes sharpened. Have you checked your accounts recently? Do you know if your name is still on the house title, on your investments, Helen? You're still trusting them. A tight knot began forming in my stomach. My pulse quickened. I hadn't thought to check anything. Why would I? They were my family. I let Tessa handle most of the online payments, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She said it was easier for tax reasons. Irene exhaled hard and sat back in her chair, her brow furrowing. Helen, you need to log into everything today, and if anything looks off, we go straight to a lawyer. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My hands started trembling, but not from fear this time, from realization, from the cold understanding that my trust had been weaponized. I wasn't some sweet, helpless old woman. I was just too trusting. And now they were counting on that trust to keep me quiet, to keep me compliant, to keep me invisible. But as Irene stared at me, waiting for my answer, I felt something in me harden, a tiny ember that had lived too long under their shadows. I straightened my back, my voice steady for the first time in days. All right, we start today. Irene nodded. Good, because you're not done yet, and they're not ready for what's coming. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message, that stupid, heartless text. I saw Tessa's rehearsed little smile, Daniel's absent nods. I heard Irene's voice ringing louder than the silence around me. You need to protect yourself. Now, at 2:17 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep. My heartbeat was loud in my ears as I reached for my laptop. For years, I let Tessa manage so many of the online accounts. It's just easier, Helen. You shouldn't have to deal with all these confusing things in your retirement, she'd say, always with that soft, syrupy voice. And I wanted to believe she was being helpful. I wanted to believe she cared. But now, my fingers hovered over the login screen with a different kind of awareness. I typed in my credentials, fingers stiff with nerves. The familiar dashboard loaded. Everything looked normal at first glance. But that was the danger. It looked normal because I had never known any better. Slowly, methodically, I combed through the account histories. My checking, my savings, my retirement investments. Most transactions were familiar. Utilities, groceries, donations, routine expenses. But the further back I scrolled, the more uneasy I became. Multiple transfers, small enough to slip beneath notice, each labeled under categories like home expenses, property maintenance, or emergency repairs. But I hadn't approved any emergency repairs, and the destinations of those transfers linked cards registered not under my name, but under a secondary user account. I clicked deeper. Tessa's name appeared. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen frozen. She had linked her card to my accounts, quietly, smoothly, for months, maybe longer, skimming, bleeding my money little by little. It wasn't just about excluding me from the cruise. It wasn't about hurt feelings or petty family tension. This was theft. And Daniel, was he too blind to see it? Or did he know and simply not care as long as the money kept flowing? A wave of heat pulsed through me. Not rage, not yet, but something colder, sharper. I closed the laptop gently and sat back, the dim light of my kitchen catching the corners of the family photographs still hanging on the walls, photos that now looked like evidence of some elaborate con I had willingly stepped into. They never loved me. They loved what I could give them. My throat burned, but no tears came. Instead, I whispered into the quiet room, "You gambled with my kindness, Tessa. You gambled with my trust." I had always told myself that being quiet didn't make me weak, but tonight I finally understood that silence could be sharp too. They had underestimated me. I would not be that fool again. By morning, I was no longer uncertain. I wasn't panicking, not anymore. The fog had cleared, leaving only cold focus. I called my financial advisor under the polite guise of a routine check-in. I didn't want to raise any flags, not yet, not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. "Of course, Mrs. Hart," Mr. Langston answered pleasantly. He had managed my portfolio for years. "What can I assist you with today?" "My son and daughter-in-law have been helping me handle some household expenses," I said, keeping my tone even. "But I'd like to make sure everything is still structured as we originally planned." He pulled up my files while I waited, forcing my breath to stay steady even as my hands trembled under the desk. Well, everything appears generally stable, though I do see some recent activity." His voice shifted ever so slightly. "It seems several fund transfers have been scheduled, mostly to cover ongoing home renovations." I swallowed hard. "Renovations?" "Yes, rather significant ones, actually. A few large sums earmarked for, quote, design upgrades, end quote, and contractor prepayments." I gripped the phone tighter. "And who authorized these transfers?" There was a brief pause. "Well, Mrs. Hart, technically you did. At least your authorized representative account did." My stomach lurched. "Which representative?" He hesitated for the first time. "It appears that your secondary authorized user, Mrs. Tessa Hart, processed these transactions. She has full access under the durable power of attorney you signed last spring." I closed my eyes briefly. I remembered that meeting. Tessa had insisted I sign the updated paperwork to make things easier in case of an emergency. She had even brought the notary herself, smiling the whole time. Of course she did." "Thank you, Mr. Langston," I said calmly. "Would you mind flagging any further transactions for my personal review before processing? I've decided to be more hands-on moving forward." He agreed without hesitation. When I hung up, I sat in the silence again. There was no doubt anymore. Tessa wasn't helping. She was positioning for when she and Daniel could quietly siphon everything, using that house as their prize. My retirement was not their inheritance, not yet, but they were already spending like it was. I looked at my late husband, Charles's locket sitting on the windowsill, the one he gave me after our 30th anniversary. He would have seen through this sooner. He had always warned me to be careful, but I wanted so badly to believe in family. For years, I had made myself so small in order to avoid conflict, but love without respect, that's a prison, and I had just found the key. I turned my gaze toward the empty shelf across the living room where I used to proudly display a framed photo from Daniel and Tessa's housewarming. I had taken it down 2 nights ago. The shelf looked better empty, lighter, and for the first time, so did I. They had gambled on my silence. They would regret that. Later that afternoon, I walked to the park. I needed air. I needed space that wasn't built by my sacrifices, filled with furniture I bought for them, or haunted by photos of people who saw me only as useful. The old oak tree still stood where Charles used to sit every Sunday afternoon, reading the paper while I fed the ducks. It had been his favorite place. He called it our little corner of calm. I sat down on the bench beneath its wide branches, the warm breeze carrying away some of the weight that had been pressing on my chest for a long while. I said nothing for a long while, just breathing, just listening. And then I whispered to him softly as though he were still sitting beside me. "You would have seen it, Charles. You would have warned me." My fingers traced the edges of the old locket I still wore, my thumb brushing over the tiny engraved date, the day we paid off our first home, the day we thought we were building a future for our family. Back when Daniel was still our bright-eyed boy, eager to build tree houses, not schemes. I bit my lip hard to stop the trembling. I didn't want to cry anymore. The tears had been spent long ago. The next morning, I was waiting at my attorney's office before they even unlocked the door. Mr. Wells had handled my affairs for years. Estate planning, the initial house purchase for Daniel and Tessa, even the original paperwork Tessa insisted I sign when she wanted more flexibility to manage household finances. Back then I had trusted her, trusted all of them. Never again. Mr. Wells greeted me with a warm smile, but the concern in his eyes betrayed him. Helen, I didn't expect to see you this early. Is everything all right? I sat down across from him and folded my hands carefully in my lap. My voice was steady, but there was no softness in it. I need to reverse the house gift. He blinked, taken slightly back. You mean the property you transferred into Daniel and Tessa's names? I nodded. Exactly that. I want it undone. I want my assets locked down, all financial powers revoked, and every paper trail documented. For a brief second, he hesitated, not because he disagreed, but because he knew what it meant. Helen, this may create tension. They've already created tension, I replied. I've simply been too blind to see it. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Very well, we'll proceed. And one more thing, I added, my voice even quieter now. I want full documentation of any financial activity they've initiated using my accounts. All of it. Every withdrawal, every transaction, every authorization Tessa processed. A trance of approval crossed his face. We'll need evidence if this ever escalates. It's going to escalate, I said calmly. Let's not pretend otherwise. He scribbled a few quick notes before glancing up. You may also want to consider hiring a private investigator. I arched an eyebrow. You think it's that serious? Mr. Wells's voice softened, but it was firm. Tessa is not just trying to manipulate. She's positioning herself for long-term control, Helen. You have significant assets. If she's already tampering with accounts, she's likely building a paper trail to justify future claims. We need a counter trail, something undeniable. The idea made my stomach twist, but not with fear, with readiness, with clarity. Do it, I said. Hire whoever you trust. He nodded. We'll handle the legal side. The investigator can handle the rest. And just like that, the wheels began turning. By the time I left his office, I felt lighter. Not because the problem was solved, far from it, but because, for the first time, I wasn't playing defense. I wasn't waiting for the next betrayal. I was moving. As I stepped back into my car, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. They wanted quiet. They would get it. But it would be my kind of quiet, the kind that moves in silence and strikes with precision. The very next morning, something slid under my door. I saw it immediately when I stepped into the kitchen. A plain white envelope, the kind Tessa always used for documents she'd prepared to help me. On top of the envelope was a sticky note, her handwriting painfully familiar. Just sign whenever you're ready, Mom. It'll make everything easier while we're away. I froze. They were already gone, off on their cruise, floating somewhere on sapphire waters, sipping cocktails, laughing, while here, back home, their game continued. With cautious fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded the stack of documents inside. Neatly typed, professionally prepared. At first glance, they looked harmless. Updated paperwork, routine amendments. Tessa had always been skilled at dressing up control as convenience. But as I read further, the pit in my stomach deepened. Buried in the fine print, carefully hidden beneath generic language about estate streamlining and simplification of authority, was a full power of attorney, permanent, irrevocable. It would give Tessa complete legal control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions, my entire life. I felt my breath hitch as the weight of it settled in my chest. They hadn't just been positioning. They were ready to take everything. Not later, not someday. Now. I stood there, gripping the pages, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the cold realization of how far they were willing to go. Tessa didn't want to wait for my natural passing. She wanted control while I was still alive, to erase me, politely, legally, without needing to get her hands dirty. And Daniel, my own son, was he truly blind? Or was he just pretending not to see what she was doing? Either way, the answer was just as devastating. They weren't family anymore. They were predators, wearing familiar faces. I gently slipped the unsigned documents back into the envelope, closed it, and laid it back on the counter like it was nothing. Let them believe I hadn't noticed. Let them think I was still that same naive woman, the one who trusted without question, who signed whatever was placed in front of her, who smiled and said, "Thank you." But that woman no longer lived here. The private investigator would be arriving later today. My attorney had already started preparing the paperwork to freeze every joint authorization, and now with these documents, I had one more piece of evidence, written proof of their intent. I sat at the kitchen table as the sun poured through the window, warming my face. They thought this was still their game, but they forgot something. Quiet doesn't mean weak. The moment I returned the unsigned documents to their original envelope, something shifted inside me. It was strange how calm I felt. I wasn't shaken anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was focused and very, very clear. They thought they could move while they were away, that I would sit here helpless, confused, overwhelmed by legal jargon, that I would feel honored to be included in my own erasure. But they underestimated me. By noon, I was back in Mr. Wells's office. This time he didn't greet me with concern. He simply nodded, already sensing the urgency written on my face. They tried to slip me this while they're out of town. I slid the envelope across his desk. He unfolded the papers carefully, his brow tightening as he read. "They're getting bold," he said finally. "This isn't just unethical. It's predatory. If you had signed this, Helen, they would have had the legal right to sell your home, drain your accounts, even place you into care facilities of their choosing." He looked up, waiting for me to show the panic he likely expected. Instead, I met his gaze evenly, then let his fill in the silence. "Then let's move faster." He smiled, a small flicker of respect shining in his eyes. "We already have most of the documents prepared. I've started the house reversal, filing the account freezes. The account freezes are being processed. The investigator has begun his financial audit, but after seeing this," he gestured to the power of attorney papers, "we'll take even more aggressive measures." I leaned forward. "Lock down everything. No one touches my accounts except me. Not another dollar moves without my signature." He nodded. "We're also drafting a protective clause for your estate. If they attempt any form of legal coercion going forward, we'll have a full timeline of manipulation to counter them." I sat back, breathing slower. My hands were still, my shoulders no longer tense. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't reacting. I was building. A wall they wouldn't even see until they ran straight into it. When I returned home that afternoon, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I moved through the rooms with new eyes. These walls no longer represented warmth or shared memories. They were monuments to my generosity and to their entitlement. I paused in front of that empty shelf again where the housewarming photo used to sit. That happy, lying photograph. I reached into the drawer and pulled it out one more time. Staring at their smiling faces, I whispered softly to the frame, "You thought I was here to serve you." My thumb hovered over Daniel's face. "You thought I'd never say no." Then I turned the photo back over and slid it deeper into the drawer. Let it sit in the dark. 2 days later, my phone rang. I recognized the number instantly. My private investigator. I answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Hart?" His voice was measured, but I could hear the weight beneath his words. "You might want to see what I've found." I closed the curtains before I spoke, out of instinct. "Tell me." He didn't waste time. "Your daughter-in-law recently listed the property as collateral for a second mortgage. She's already started the pre-approval process with a private lender. The paperwork was filed last week." I stood perfectly still. They were already borrowing against the house. I had fully gifted them, as if it was untouchable, theirs to leverage without a care in the world. "Did they disclose how they obtained ownership?" I asked. "They presented it as a clear family transfer," he said flatly. "No mention of the power of attorney manipulation or the unauthorized financial activity tied to your accounts. In fact, the lender was impressed with their, quote, generous family backing." I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to stop myself from shaking. They weren't just taking my money anymore, they were gambling with it. They were building debt atop my generosity, debts I never authorized, risks I never agreed to shoulder. If I hadn't started this process when I did, I might have come home one day to find the house sold, my savings drained, my accounts emptied, and legally they would have walked away untouched. Do they have any idea you're aware of this? I asked. No, ma'am. As far as they know, you're still sitting quietly at home. I let out a slow breath. Good. Let's keep it that way. We hung up. I sat in the dim light of my living room for a while, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house. This was no longer just betrayal. This was theft in progress, and yet, oddly, I felt no panic, no rage, only a cold, sharp sense of direction. They weren't careful because they thought I would never question them. They thought I was still the mother who'd do anything to keep the peace. They hadn't realized something very simple yet. When a woman like me finally says no, it's already too late for the other side. I stood, smoothed the front of my blouse, and looked out the window at the house I had bought for them. And in that quiet moment, I smiled. You gambled with my gift, Tessa. Now I'll gamble with your future. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the window in silence, watching the street lamps cast long shadows across the empty sidewalk. The world outside moved gently, unaware of the storm quietly unfolding inside these walls. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared, I wasn't confused, I was calculating. They thought I would crumble under the weight of their betrayal. They thought their careful smiles, their "we're just helping you, Mom" routines, had left me powerless. But the truth was simple. They'd built their house of cards on my trust, and now I had stopped holding my breath. I watched as a neighbor pulled into their driveway, their headlights briefly illuminating my living room. The beam flickered across the empty spot on the mantel where the family photo used to sit. The empty shelf looked cleaner now, honest. I whispered into the quiet air, more to myself than anyone else. They gambled with my gift, Tessa. Now I'll gamble with your future. It felt good to say it out loud. I had spent years swallowing discomfort, convincing myself that love meant tolerance, that being needed was the same as being valued. But being needed isn't the same as being loved. They loved my money, my usefulness, my willingness to hand over everything without asking questions. But the moment they no longer needed me personally, the mother, the woman, they tossed me aside with a smile. And now they were far enough out on that limb that I didn't have to push. I just had to stop holding it steady. I closed my eyes and pictured Tessa's face, the polite, practiced concern, the rehearsed sweet voice she used whenever she wanted something. "You're like a second mother to me, Helen." Lies. No one tries to erase their own mother. No one carefully buries power of attorney paperwork beneath meaningless forms unless they've been planning it for a long time. I opened my eyes and leaned back in my chair, feeling my spine straighten. They had counted on my silence, but my silence had become my weapon. I stared out the window a little longer, the night air cool against the glass. It was strange, after everything they'd done. I didn't feel broken. I felt powerful. The next few days moved like clockwork. No emotion, no hesitation, just one deliberate step after another. Every morning, I sat in Mr. Wells' office, flanked by him on one side and the private investigator on the other. We worked quietly, efficiently, almost clinically. Every transaction was dissected, every withdrawal traced, every account Tessa had touched was documented with meticulous care. As the files piled up, my stomach should have churned, but it didn't. The deeper we dug, the clearer it all became. Tessa hadn't just linked her personal card to my accounts. She had used my retirement fund to pay off personal credit card debt. She had funneled money into private investment accounts tied to her maiden name. She even used my name to secure pre-approval for the second mortgage they intended to take out on the house I had gifted them, all while smiling at me across dinner tables, all while calling me Mom. Mr. Wells slid yet another printed statement across the table. "This pattern of deception will speak volumes in court if necessary," the private investigator added. "And the timing lines up too neatly. The cruise, perfect cover while these final documents were slipped under your door. She wanted you legally powerless before you realized what they were preparing to do." I nodded, letting the facts settle like a weight that no longer belonged on my shoulders. "It's greed, dressed up as concern," I said quietly. "They didn't want me gone. They just wanted control." Mr. Wells met my eyes, and they would have had it, Helen. Completely. Most people sign these documents without ever reading the fine print. But I didn't sign, I said. My voice was flat. Solid. No, you didn't, Mr. Wells agreed. And now they've left a trail long enough to hang themselves with. We worked late that night. By the time I left, the sky had grown dark again, but I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel afraid. I felt something stronger, momentum. When I got home, I walked through the house with a different kind of gaze now. The drapes Tessa had chosen, the expensive light fixtures I paid for, the marble countertops she insisted on upgrading last year, the soft close cabinets she had to have because she claimed it made the house feel more sophisticated. It was all mine again, every piece. They had gambled everything on the assumption that I would stay quiet, that I would be too old, too docile, too eager to hold on to any scraps of affection they offered. They forgot who built this house. I ran my fingers gently along the kitchen counter and whispered, "You tried to erase me while I was still breathing. Now I'm erasing you while you're still pretending to smile." Tomorrow was the day. The paperwork would be filed, the house reversal finalized, the asset freezes activated, and by the time their cruise ship pulled back into port, the world they thought was theirs would already be gone, and they wouldn't even know it until they tried to step back into it. The document sat in front of me, waiting. It was all here. The house reversal, the asset protections, the complete revocation of Tessa's financial access. Every loophole they'd built for themselves had been closed. Every inch of ground they thought they owned had been pulled out from under them, all without a single confrontation. Mr. Wells stood quietly at the far end of the conference table. The notary adjusted her pen, waiting. All that was left was my signature. For a moment, my hand hovered over the page, not from doubt, that was long gone, but from the sheer gravity of what this moment meant. It wasn't just legal paperwork. It was years of sacrifice, devotion, blind love, and quiet suffering, all being rewritten in thick black ink. The notary glanced up politely, silent, but expectant. My hand didn't tremble as I finally pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. One page, then another and another. With each signature, I felt lighter. When the last document was signed, Mr. Wells gathered the pages carefully, his expression steady, but his voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "It's done, Helen. Full reversal, executed. The house is legally yours again. Every financial authorization they held has been voided. They can't touch anything now. Not your accounts, not your property, not even your utilities." I nodded once. My voice was calm. "And if they try to contest it?" Mr. Wells's eyes sharpened. "We have every shred of evidence needed, the investigator's full report, the unauthorized transactions, the coercive power of attorney paperwork they slipped under your door while they were conveniently out of town. If they challenge it, they expose themselves." I let out a slow breath. The fear was gone. The waiting was over. For the first time in years, my future belonged entirely to me again. I stepped out into the cool evening air. I paused on the courthouse steps. Their cruise ship would be docking in 4 days. 4 days before they came back expecting to return to the world they controlled. They had no idea the locks had changed. They had no idea the house they were so eager to leverage for debt was already sold, quietly, legally, and irrevocably, while they floated on a ship believing they had won. The sale had finalized just hours before I signed the reversal. A clean buyer, full cash offer, expedited closing. The money was already safe in a new account. One they couldn't touch. One they didn't even know existed. I smiled as the wind picked up, cool against my face. They thought I was helpless. They thought my silence meant surrender. But silence can be powerful. The morning they returned, I was already there. I parked a block away, standing quietly across the street as their car pulled up. They were home from their glittering cruise, tanned, relaxed, and completely unaware. Tessa stepped out first, sunglasses perched high on her head, barking orders at Daniel as he pulled their luggage from the trunk. She was already talking something about needing to schedule an appointment for the second mortgage finalization. Daniel barely responded. He was scrolling through his phone, as usual, detached but obedient. Then they both froze. 2 unfamiliar cars were parked in the driveway, moving vans. A young couple stood near the front door, happily chatting with the realtor. I crossed the street slowly, each step measured, unhurried. Daniel was the first to spot me. "Mom!" His voice wavered between confusion and something else. Something creeping into his eyes. Fear. Tessa's eyes narrowed. "What's going on? Who are these people?" The young couple smiled politely and walked inside with the realtor. The front door closed behind them. Their door. Now I finally spoke. You won't need to worry about managing anything for me anymore. Tessa's face flushed instantly. What the hell does that mean? Daniel's voice rose. Mom, what's happening? Why are there people in our house? I let the silence hang, watching their panic bloom. Not your house, I said calmly. Not anymore. Tessa lunged forward, her voice rising in that shrill tone she always slipped into when things didn't go her way. You can't do this. We're in the middle of refinancing. We have contracts. I cut her off, reaching into my bag and pulling out the thick folder. Here are the only contracts that matter. I handed the folder to Daniel. His hands shook as he opened it, flipping through the paperwork. His face drained of color as he read each page. The reversal, the sale documents, the investigator's report. Copies of Tessa's unauthorized transactions. Proof of everything. Tessa snatched the papers from him frantically, skimming the contents, her breathing quickened. She was calculating, searching for loopholes, for anything she could twist. None of this will hold up, she snapped. We were managing things for your benefit. You'll regret this when you calm down. We were just trying to help. I kept my voice steady. Help? You mean draining my accounts behind my back, gambling with debt tied to a house you didn't even own anymore, forging power of attorney documents and hoping I'd quietly sign while you were halfway across the ocean? Tessa's jaw clenched. Daniel finally spoke. Mom, we didn't mean... I raised my hand. Stop. The word was quiet, firm, final. You didn't mean to get caught. Neither spoke. For the first time, I saw it clearly in their faces. Not love, not remorse, just fear. The kind of fear people feel when they realize the person they underestimated has been watching, waiting. I let the silence stretch between us. Then, for the first time in months, I smiled. A real smile. You gambled with my trust, I said, and you lost. Tessa's face contorted into something ugly. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal, still ready to strike, but realizing the trap had already snapped shut. You can't just take everything from us, she screamed. We built this life. You don't get to destroy it because of a few misunderstandings. Daniel's breathing grew shallow. His hands clutched the folder like it might vanish if he held it tight enough. I stayed still, measured. You didn't build this life, I answered quietly. You took it, piece by piece, smile by smile, and you thought I would let you? Tessa's voice cracked with desperation. Now we have rights. We're family. You can't just cut us off like this. I could feel the weight of the years behind me, the countless times I stayed silent to keep the peace, the humiliations I swallowed to be the good mother, the guilt, the giving, the believing, but not today. I reached back into my bag and pulled out the second folder, thinner than the first, but heavier somehow. I held it up between us. If you want to pursue legal action, I said calmly, this is what you'll be facing. I handed it to her. She snatched it like a rabid dog lunging for meat. Inside was the full evidence packet prepared by the investigator and Mr. Wells. Copies of every unauthorized withdrawal, every transfer, every fraudulent filing Tessa had made under my name, every document she had slipped beneath my door while smiling into my face. Fraud, elder financial abuse, coercion, forgery. Tessa flipped through the pages faster now, her breath quickening. Color drained from her cheeks as the reality began to close in around her. I spoke softer this time, but with even more weight. If you even attempt to take me to court, Tessa, this file becomes public record. Every transaction, every falsified document, every attempt to steal from your own mother-in-law, I let the words sink like an anchor. Daniel whispered almost inaudibly, Tessa, what did you do? She snapped her head toward him, her voice breaking. Don't you dare put this on me, Daniel. You were fine with it when the money was coming in. But Daniel just stood there, eyes wide, shoulders slumping under the weight of everything unraveling in front of him. I watched them both carefully. The marriage that had once seemed so united in its quiet cruelty was cracking fast. I took a deep breath and spoke my final words. I was your mother, Daniel. You made me your target. His lip quivered. His head lowered. For a brief second, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who once asked me to fix his toy truck, who once ran to me with scraped knees. But that boy was long gone, and I was done mourning him. This isn't revenge, I continued, my voice softer now. It's protection. For the first time in years, I am finally protecting myself. Tessa threw the folder onto the pavement, glaring at me. You think you've won, but you'll end up alone. I smiled again, calm, steady. Alone, I said softly, is better than being used. Then I turned my back and walked away. I never once looked back. I drove home slowly. The engine hummed softly beneath me as I wound through quiet streets, feeling every breath steady itself. The sun had dipped low by the time I pulled into my modest apartment building. Not grand, not flashy, but mine. Fully mine. By the time I locked my door behind me, I imagined the scene still unfolding back at that house. My house, now someone else's house. The movers, the new couple happily settling into the place Daniel and Tessa once believed was untouchable. And them, standing outside on that driveway, surrounded by the wreckage of their plans, their house gone, their schemes exposed, their illusions shattered. The phone buzzed once on the counter, a text message. It was from Daniel. Mom, please can we talk? This isn't what I wanted, please. I stared at the words, cold, empty. He hadn't even called me Mom in person for months, but now, stripped of everything, he suddenly remembered who I was to him. I didn't reply. A second message followed within minutes. I'm sorry, Tessa got carried away. She pushed me. You know how she is. I never wanted to hurt you. I could almost hear his voice in those words. Desperate, reaching, scrambling to rewrite history now that there was nothing left to steal. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't type anything back, because I had finally learned. You only miss me now that I said no. I placed the phone face down on the table and walked toward the window. The evening breeze carried the faint sound of children playing somewhere down the street. Simple, honest laughter. Behind me, the apartment was quiet, safe, empty, in the best way. No manipulation, no agendas, just peace. They thought I couldn't live without them, but the truth was I had been suffocating beneath them for years. Every sacrifice I made for Daniel, every dollar, every hour of my life poured into that house, that marriage, that family, had turned into a weapon they used against me. And yet, standing here now, stripped of everything I once clung to, I had never felt lighter. Let them rage, let them scramble, let them blame. I had nothing left to give them, and that made me the freest woman alive. I whispered into the empty room like a quiet prayer meant only for me. Quiet doesn't mean weak. And finally, I believed.